So, since I've lost my German Shepherd a few months ago, walking in the woods here has not been quite the pleasure that it obviously was before, and so I've taken up spending more time, should I say, with one of my hobbies, which is photography, and I'll carry on with that, I guess, and my cars, plus the development, until I get my new dog, which, as it stands at the moment, will probably be this Jack Russell, but I still believe I'll get another German Shepherd as well this year, but we'll see on that. Oh, something's running across there. I got my scooter out. I got my scooter out yesterday. It was such a nice day, and I took it for a little short spin. But then I decided to, because where it was, some pigeons have been getting ready to nest, and they've started to make a mess of this cover. So I decided to bring it in here and keep it away. This is another example of something that I bought, and I really just hate driving it on the road or anything, because even after a little run yesterday, in a couple of days I'm going to have to get underneath this and completely clean the underside, because this bike didn't have a mark on it when I bought it, and really my intention was that I wanted to have it in my front room. Oh, sorry, I leaned against this metal wall here. I wanted to have it in my front room and sort of sit on it, instead of sitting on an armchair in the evening. But my wife doesn't sort of go with that. She doesn't see the point of it, but I do. To me, it's something that should be in the house. Anyway. Right, well, it's a lovely day, and the building is getting bigger. Getting bigger by the moment. And this is my Crossfire, and in a few hours I've got to take it into the garage, because tomorrow it's having a service. And actually, ashamed to say it, but it's the first proper service it's had since I bought it. And of course the reason it's having a service is, well, it needs one, but it's got to have its annual MOT, which is due. So I've had the car getting on to a year. I bought it just after it had its first MOT, and how it passed that I don't know. I shouldn't say too much, because the tyres weren't really up to it, but of course I've had new tyres fitted at the back since then. The only two things that I think need sorting out on it are the handbrake needs adjusting, and the jets aren't too good. They're blocked up a bit for the washer for the windscreen. But other than that, I'm hoping that everything's fine, because it has actually it's been into the garage and checked over, and it's had the aircon sorted out, and they've had a look at suspension and everything else. I can't see that there's anything else wrong with it. I had the problem with the lights where the yellow was flaking off the bulbs, and I've replaced all those. So I'm hoping that everything will be all right. So I think just a service, and that should attend to the handbrake as well, and everything should be okay. But there was something I just wanted to mention. Well, we might as well just sit in the front of the... Well, there is only a front in the Crossfire. There is no back. Anyway, we'll sit in the Crossfire. And I just wanted to... Oh, this is carrying on. But, I just wanted to say this. There we are. This is Classic Car Weekly again. And Isle of Wight Garage, we need apprentices. And this is apparently a really nice garage on the Isle of Wight, the south of England, and they specialise in classic cars. And they can't get apprentices. They're, like they say, all the mechanics are getting older, and they can't get new people. And when they, it says that in here, when they interview people, they turn out to be technicians, not mechanics. You know, the technicians are just people who worked for garages before, looking for another job, and all they really do, they've plugged in diagnostic equipment, and then obviously fitted complete components, but they haven't, stripped down engines, analysed carburetor, and I mean all those sort of things that go with that type of technology. So I would say that, when you look at the whole range of classic cars, you've got all the newer ones like this car, even if you want to even consider it a classic, but let's just call it a car that's of interest to some people. How long will it be able to be maintained and kept on the road? I would say, incidentally, that the legislation that they're bringing in to get a lot of these cars off the road goes possibly unnoticed by most people. I mean, this vehicle now, it will only mean much to people in England, but it costs £540 just to tax it. And I've got to pay that tax at the end of this month. So when you take the tax and then you take the insurance, and you're looking at a large sum of money each year just for the car to sit outside your house. That's without any other considerations. So it is a luxury, and you're probably looking at 25% of the car's value being spent every year just to own it. And of course, while it's probably not going down in value anymore, I doubt at the moment if it's going to go up. What will happen in the longer term? If it was 5 to 10 years ago, I would have said, "Oh, this car will go up in value because, it will. It's a rare car. It's attractive to many people." But I don't know now. I've changed my mind a lot on this because we're moving. We're being forced, rather, away from classic cars, from old cars. They announced today, of course, the headline is old cars, being basically stopped from going into London. So there's a big surcharge. It's only £20 a day or something ridiculous on top of the ordinary charge. So yeah, it's just ridiculous to drive a car. But actually, they're not all old cars, because they went on to say, like in the small print of the news item, 3-year-old diesels it affects as well. And the truth is that it will become impossible to drive around in the big cities with, I don't know, practically any car really, unless it's going to be, well, they'll direct us to hybrids, I guess. I mean, a car that has some partial ability to create its own, generate its own electricity. Still be polluting actually, but probably worse with a tiny little engine. But anyway, that's another issue. Okay, that's all really I've got to say, I guess. I'm going to take this to the garage later and leave it there tonight, and then pick it up in a day or two and see what it's like. Right, well, I've booked it in, it's here, but now I've got to wait for my wife, so I'm going to sit in it for a bit till she arrives, because it's raining a little bit now. So what are they going to do to it? Let's have a look. Oh, God. Right, so I had a word with them, and the only 3 things that I really think that I can find with the car, as I say, is that the handbrake really needs adjusting. Doesn't really work that well at all. Obviously, I don't even think it passed the MOT, but one of the jets, especially the one on the driver's side, there's 4 of them, one of the jets is not working well, so that needs cleaning out. And the worst thing really is the excuse me, the knocking underneath the floor when you go over bumps. If you go over really sort of rattly bumps, it sounds like it's the exhaust, because it's had a special exhaust fitted, so it wasn't the standard exhaust, and somehow that is really banging onto the floor there. It sounds terrible. So I'm hoping that they'll be able to resolve that, and then service it at MOT, and we should be all right. So now I just sit and wait for my wife. Right, well, the Crossfire's parked up, and I'm still waiting. Hopefully I'll see it in a few days. Now, where's my wife? Right. Well, we're at the top of this building, mine that we're building, and excuse the noises, I think you might hear it. There's a guy doing some mowing at the moment. What it is, sometimes you've got to really get on top of things, or look down on it and see what's really going on, and sometimes it's easier to look at the classic car world from up here. Yeah, look, there's some of my cars here. There's the Crossfire and the Jag XJ8 and the Renault Aventine. So I was thinking about the cars again, and there's an interesting thing, because yesterday I went somewhere. Yeah, I went to see a guy I know, and he's got a lot of cars, keeps them in sheds, and a group of us went to have a look at them. Now, most of these cars are Edwardian cars. They're, from the 20s and 30s. Well, it's maybe a bit later than Edwardian, but it's the period before basically from the First World War to the Second World War, that kind of period. That's most of his cars. And well, first of all, I think I just better explain what I'm going to talk about. Really is cars, old cars, and how they fit into the society in England. Now, this obviously is not necessarily going to be the same as the United States, so anyone that may be listening to me from the United States, this might not seem to make much sense, perhaps. You see, in England, I mean, during the 1930s and 40s, I think there was a lot of people who had got into cars because cars were fairly new then, obviously, and the generation that had them first around the First World War and just after, then the next generation was after the First World War, rather, sorry, and before the Second World War, and they got into cars around the end of the Second World War, really, and these were people who could afford a car, because up until the Second World War, especially when the problems in the 30s, only a certain class of person could afford a car, and a lot of those younger people, they wanted sports cars, and there was a big demand in the UK, in England, for sports cars after the war. All these guys that had fought in the war, and the RAF and everything, you saw the movies all about them, they were buying MGs and that sort of thing, and there were a lot of people in business, and they were buying Bentleys and Rolls and Lagondas and all sorts of expensive English cars. But the 50s saw the real opening up of cars for everyone. There was a shortage of cars. Up until then, the Austin 7 obviously had fulfilled a demand for cheaper cars. But really, I think the big flow of cars into the market as we kind of know it today, the family man, the ordinary guy who's had a couple of kids and a dog and wanted a car, that really started in the 50s. So people that had money, and were interested in cars during the 50s and 60s, they were the ones who were getting involved with the old vintage cars, the one that were going to London to Brighton, the ones that were built before 1904. And then we had the sort of veteran cars, which went up to, I don't know really where they really go, but let's say we're talking about the end of the Second World War. The people who had those cars, and still have them today, are basically people who had money. They were people from, upper class really in the UK. Who else could afford these cars? They were very expensive. They were luxury cars, luxury possessions, and the only people that could afford them were people who had money. And that continued. The people who kept them going and kept them as sort of collector pieces, they were people that had money, and they still are. Now, just to prove this point, as I say, a couple of days ago, we went to see a friend, and we were looking at the cars that he's got, and most of these cars are cars from that period. And I know very few people who, are not well-to-do who would have these cars. So I'm just going to show you now some pictures, some photographs I took a couple of days ago of these cars and the type of things I'm talking about. Right, well, I hope you enjoyed those pictures. Now, my generation after the war, the first generation after the war, what we liked is American things. Everything that was to do with America were music, clothes, language, and cars. And this particular car here that I've got, a 1947 Dodge, was one of the earlier models, obviously, but what we were really interested in was the 50s models that came out, the sort of rock and roll style, and when Elvis came. And I've had those cars myself, but you know, I've got older now, and I've got rid of all those cars, and I've kept this 47 Dodge, but that's where we all went to. You know, I couldn't afford at the time, I'm not even thinking I could afford it now really, but these old cars that you've just seen the pictures of. But on the other hand, I really wouldn't want them because I don't know anything about them. I didn't grow up with them. They weren't something that I really wanted when I was young. So my generation wanted this type of car from the 50s. There were English ones as well. You know, we've got Vauxhall Crestas, we've got some of the Ford Consuls and Zodiacs, and they had American styling, and they were sought after. Then the 60s came, and we started to get into faster cars, and those cars are the ones which the generation that followed me a bit really, or people who are a bit younger than me really wanted. They wanted the Lotus Cortinas, you know, the English cars. They wanted the Capris, these sort of things. And certainly, would they want these old Edwardian type cars? I don't think so. I really don't think so. And if they had the money, I don't think they would. You get the exceptional person, obviously, who will buy them. But I mean, they don't work well. They don't fit well on today's roads. They don't. They're different in terms of driving skills. They don't have the weather protection and all the things that we've got used to. Whereas, you know, you can buy a car. I mean, even that Dodge. So it's 70 years old, but you know, it's got a radio in it. It's you can drive it in the wet. It's got wipers and heater. You know, it's kind of a modern car. It'll keep up with modern traffic more or less. It'll cruise at 65 on the motorway quite happily. So you know, you can drive that car around in today's traffic within reason. But you know, if I was to buy a 1923 or 25, say, Humber, which was all open top and everything, and it maybe had a top speed of 45 miles an hour, I don't know. I don't even know how I would use it or where I would use it, so I wouldn't buy one. Apart from anything else, it would be very expensive, I would imagine now. So what is the next stage? And I think the next stage is that obviously, and you know, everyone talks about it, it'll be the cars that young people see around now will be the cars that they'll crave and fancy and fantasize over in another 30 years. But that's where we have this big question mark, because I don't think, and I've said this so many times, I don't think that the majority of those cars will be on the road. I think they'll be off the road because of legislation. They'll be off the road because they can't be maintained. They can't be kept running in the condition that they were manufactured in. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna have cars, I think, that will be able to be converted to electricity, and I'm talking maybe in 25-30 years. In 25 or 30 years, I can tell you one thing: people will turn around and say, well, you know, we knew this would happen, or whatever. And it's easy with when you're there, but everyone now turns around and says, I know what happened 25 years ago, we should have seen it coming or whatever. But people didn't see what was coming. People don't, basically. So I would ask people, you know, what do they really think? You know, they're going to put money down on what they think is going to happen in 25 years as far as cars are concerned. I'm pretty certain that these complicated electronic driven cars will not be around. I really cannot see how. And we're already in the stage where a lot of them can't even be driven in the cities. So if you can't drive your car in the big cities, you're already asking yourself, what's the point of it? I mean, it's different if you've got car like a little Fiat 500 or that little 2CV of mine, that sort of car, and it's converted to electric maybe, you know, more easily done, and you've got a fun little body, and you can drive it around in a town then. But you know, but what are you going to do with my Jag? Well, it's going to be a non-runner, isn't it? So the question is then, what about all the millions and millions of pounds that have been invested in cars? And I'm talking about the Aston Martins, the big Jags, E-types, the Ferraris, all these cars. Well, they're like paintings, aren't they? They have a value because they have a value. And it's not a stupid thing to say that, because once somebody's paid £1 million for a car, their expectation is that somebody else will pay that or more. And then if they sell it to that person, the same expectation exists. So in other words, that is not a car anymore. It is just a depository for a sum of money. I mean, at the end of the day, what is money? Money's just paper, isn't it? But we have the expectation that somebody else will take that piece of paper and give us in exchange. It will take the paper and exchange it for something else, whether it's goods or services. And the same with a car. There's that much money in it. So the old car like the Aventine, you know, nobody at the moment expects to pay more than a few thousand quid for it, because they know they're never going to get more than a few thousand quid for it. But if they bought a car for £1 million and they would expect to get a million at least back for it, so it's not a car anymore, is it? So these depositories for large sums of money, I'm guessing, will probably stay. You know, they'll end up, they won't be driven. They'll just be cars that are kept as almost museum pieces and examples of technology that we had in the 20th century. Because what else are you going to do with them? They're too valuable to drive around anyway. They don't drive them now. And what is the point of having a car if you're not going to drive it? The only other point is to keep it because you want to keep it as, for whatever reason, whether it's nostalgic to you or whether it's an investment. It's just a piece of metal sitting there that you got for that reason. Now, once we can't drive these cars, and I had this problem with the Volvo, my XC90, I mean, I liked it, but once it got to the point where I just couldn't keep the thing going, I sold it. I got rid of it. I sold it basically for nothing, because it was of no use to me. And how many cars am I going to keep that reach the point that I can't use them? Now, this guy who's got all these Edwardian cars, they must have quite a good value. I'm guessing. I don't really know the value of those cars. And I'm not even going to, hazard a guess, but let's say that they're more than my cars, that's for sure. So he does drive them, actually, a lot of them. But they have a value. Even if he didn't drive them, he would just keep them. He wouldn't do what I did with the Volvo, and that is, well, it doesn't drive now. I can't take it on the road. I'm just going to scrap it. No, he's not going to do that. So he's either going to keep them for himself because he wants to, or he's going to sell them on to somebody else who wants them and will pay that money. Not as a car to drive, because they're not a car to drive, are they? They're a car to have. A lot of the cars that I've got are cars that are halfway. They're cars that I want to have, but they're cars that are actually practical. They drive, they're legally on the road, and unless they can't be illegally on the road, then we have a problem. I don't know if this is making sense. I just think that where we're going is a place where a lot of the cars that the people follow, the hobby of classic cars, a lot of these cars will not be around. That's really what I keep coming to. And because they're not going to be around, how are people going to follow this hobby when they're just people like me who are just keeping normal, average bog standard cars in a way that you can afford, not some veteran or vintage car or expensive supercar. Because all of those category of cars, the supercar, the really expensive stuff, you forget all those, they're money. I'm talking about the bulk of the people that like old cars are like me. They just have cars that are within the ability of us, and that we can afford to buy them and maintain them. And when we don't, what's going to happen? I'm not going to buy a £150,000 Aston Martin, and I don't know, and I'm not really going to keep all my cars just sitting around doing nothing, because I'll tell you what happens when things just sit around doing nothing. So here's what happened. Here, that's a dryer. Haven't installed it yet. It's a new one. Here, in this very spot, a few weeks ago, was my scooter, my Vespa scooter, a 1960 VBB Vespa 150, and I decided to start it up, take it around, run it around a little bit, and then I decided then to put it into a shed, because I wanted to keep it away from a pigeon that I thought was actually going to nest here, and I thought I'd put it away somewhere safer. So I got one of those slabs, put it there, and drove the scooter up into here. And here we are. One Vespa. You can see where the pigeons have been on it. There's my Vespa, right. Now if you look a bit closely there, you'll see that stain on the ground. That's petrol. I came in here a few days ago, and this had been in here now for about a week, and found that all the petrol, the whole tank, which was full actually, I filled it up, ready for the spring, and I was going to take it out, and the whole tank basically has drained. I think actually it's just down to the reserve, but now I haven't investigated yet. I tend to do that sometime this week. What's happened? Perhaps a mouse, well not in here because there's no mice in here, but maybe a mouse had got into it just prior to when I moved it and chewed through a fuel line. One possibility. It's possible that the cold out there, we'd had some 4 or 5 below zero evenings. Maybe the fuel line wasn't that good and it froze, and when I started it up, and it cracked a line, or maybe the fuel line just came loose. I'm guessing. I'm hoping it's something simple like that. In fact, I've got some more better fuel line that I use for something else, and I'm gonna have a look at this. I'm hoping that's what it'll be. So, but the point is, this was sitting there, not even doing anything, and it went wrong. And this is the problem with cars, isn't it? If you can't drive them and you can't take them out, they're not actually going to last necessarily. Yeah, and I was coming out of a post office the other day, a country post office, and I was in my Jag actually, and a woman pulled up in one of these Crossfires. In fact, it was exactly the same as mine, but it was black. It was beautiful, actually, really nice. Same car, 6-speed, same engine, everything. Same year, I think. She'd had it from new. We had to talk about the car, and we agreed on many things about the car. Had the same sort of experiences with it, though she'd had hers obviously for a long time, and I'd only had mine now for just over a year, I think. But one thing we did agree on was, as well, was that these cars aren't worth any money, and how amazing that was. Now she said she wasn't going to sell hers because she loved it. She thought it was a great looking car, and I agree with her. And what was the point of selling it now? You're not going to get anything for it, a few £1,000s. It's criminal, really. But then, who wants a car like this? Because it costs £540 here to tax this car alone, and I think I said this in my last video. So you're looking at already nearly getting onto about £1,000 a year just to keep this on the road without driving it. And if something goes wrong with it, only enthusiasts, as long as there's people like me and this woman and people like us who like cars like this enough to pay that sort of money to keep them going. But once that we reach the point where they're not around, no one's going to keep these cars. Well, I suppose what happens is they get bought up by guys who just buy them and run them into the ground as soon as they start going wrong. Obviously then they just dump them, like I dumped the Volvo, really, because you get to the point with an older car, and that is the point in an old car, that when you can't get it going, can't keep it going, or it's just not realistic anymore to keep throwing absolutely thousands of pounds at it, it goes in the crusher. And that is what is going to happen. I'm absolutely certain of it with most of these cars, but not necessarily with this other car. This car, and as long as from legislation perspective, point of view, we can keep these cars on the road, these will keep running. They're simple, they're easy, you can still get parts, and I think it's going to carry on. There's just too many people in them. And I think even younger people now will gradually, a new generation of people will come along to take these cars on. I don't think necessarily that will apply to the Jag, but I think these cars, a whole new generation, because a lot of the people that love these cars, and I'm going to like Croatia, like a lot of people are going this year again to the rally, 2CV rally. I would imagine that the bulk of the people, and the biggest percentage of the people are young, and they've taken up this car and maybe these as well, and they've discovered how much fun they are, because these are really good cars. They're totally different experience. They're not like driving a modern car or any of these modern classics, as they're kind of laughingly called, really. Even I call them that, but it's a bit silly. So in a way, these are true classics, I guess, but they're certainly lovely. And I just think these are two cars which, whatever happens, I'm going to keep them. That's really where we're going now. The Aventime is so different, and actually it's a lovely car to drive. I mean, it is really beautiful to drive. It drives like a dream. I think so. I really do enjoy driving that. The Jag is beautiful. I like all cars really, but it's a complex car that I know that something's going to happen. I just know it, that I won't be able to get fixed one day, or it'll be so expensive I'll be wondering whether I should do it. My Dodge, actually, though, that fits into really the same category as these. I haven't had a lot of trouble with my Dodge, touch wood, but better touch wood. But a few years ago, when I had all my American cars and I was always fixing them up or getting parts for them, they were easy to get parts, and I'm assuming it's still the same at the moment. Okay, so what's the next thing?